that regardless of what is sacred and what is holy has no meaning. So now this country needs to rise before that capitalism is controlling this country. And we are all being called out to stand in this way. So our work continues. We have heard loud and clear their position. But again, I want to thank our tremendous attorneys who worked very hard. But this message goes out to all tribal leadership, tribal governments, people of this country. We now need to rise. Thank you very much.
As I mentioned, my name is Goodrich, and what you just heard today was an oral argument in the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. And this is a court that's going to decide whether or not the government can move forward with its plans to turn over Oak Flat to a foreign-owned copper mining company and allow it to be completely destroyed. And the facts in this case are not in dispute. Oak Flat was Apache land since before the United States existed, until the United States government took it by force. And Oak Flat is the center of Apache religious existence. It's a site of core religious practices that can't be relocated. And yet our government is planning to transfer Oak Flat to a copper mine for complete destruction and end those religious practices forever. So what we were arguing in court today is that this action by our government is not only unjust, but also violates multiple federal laws, including the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the Free Exercise Clause of the Constitution, and the government's own treaty entered in 1852 with the Western Apache peoples. And I was personally, as Dr. Nosey mentioned today, what you heard at oral argument was the United States, our government, the Biden administration, saying that it has complete authority over all federal lands to destroy any sacred site that it wants, and that it won't face any scrutiny for that whatsoever. It was a sweepingly broad argument from the federal government and should be deeply disturbing to all Americans, and particularly Americans of faith. Because it's not just Apache Stronghold and the Western Apaches and their practices that are at issue today. The government's position threatens all people of faith. But I think the silver lining from today is that the starkness and the brutality of the government's position was on full display, and the judges asked some very hard questions of the government today, and the government did not have good answers. And the hope that I take away is that the U.S. government, the Biden administration, it doesn't have the final say here. The court is going to have the final say here, and if this court doesn't issue the right ruling, we'll have the option to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. And at the end of the day, what the government here is doing is so egregious and so unfortunate. We have very strong confidence that we are going to prevail at the end of the day, and the government is not going to be allowed to destroy Oak Flat, and that the grandmothers, the mothers, and the daughters who held their ceremonies there will be able to pass that on to future generations. And that's good not only for Apaches, but for everybody in this country. So thank you.
Thank you. Reuters. Yeah, Nathan Pradier with Reuters. Did the judge give you a sense at all which way this could go? Do you feel it'll go one way versus the other based on today's session?
Yeah, it's really hard and frankly dangerous to try to predict which way the court's going to rule based on oral argument. But one thing you saw, Judge Berzon, the presiding judge today, asked a number of very hard questions of the government, and the government really struggled to give a coherent answer. And so on the whole, I take that as a good sign that the court is not just going to look the other way, like some courts have done before, but they're going to give this case a really hard look. And when they do, I think they'll see what the right thing is to do.
We had a question come in from a reporter who couldn't make it here. First question is, when in your experience do you expect the court to actually come down with a ruling?
Yeah. So after the argument today, the judges will go back in a private conference and discuss the cases and vote. But then it will be a process of about 3 months, possibly longer, where the judges will write their a written opinion revealing their votes in the case and how they think the case should be decided. So anywhere from 3 months, even up to 9 months sometimes, it can take the court to issue its decision.
Do you see any bias in terms of religious freedoms of Christian burial grounds or other religious denominations versus Native American sacred lands?
Yeah, great question. For those who didn't hear, the question was, do you see any bias in how Christian or other religions are treated versus Apaches? And it actually came up at the argument today. One of the hard questions that the judge asked of the government was, if this were St. Patrick's Cathedral and the government took that over and destroyed it, would that be a substantial burden on religious exercise? And the government had to admit, yes. But for some reason, when the government clearly by force took Oak Flat and drove the Apaches off by force, now they're trying to say that it's not a substantial burden flat to a foreign-owned copper mining company and allow it to be destroyed. So I think without question, if this were a Christian site and the government were taking it over, that would never be allowed. But this is a very unfortunate aspect of our nation's history, that the government has repeatedly destroyed Apache lives and lands, and particularly for the sake of mining interests. And so we think that history should not repeat itself again today.
Second question from outside, and you may have answered it in your initial statement, is if the court does not rule in your favor here, what recourse do you have?
Yeah, so the question is, what if the court doesn't rule in our favor? So if the court doesn't rule in our favor, we have the option of appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court, which we'll do in consultation with Apache Stronghold. And I think one thing to keep in mind here is the Supreme Court right now has issued a number of very good rulings, both on religious freedom and in some cases on Native American rights. And so we are fully prepared, if it comes to that, to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we think that we have a very strong case to make there. But we're still hopeful that even today's court will do the right thing and rule in favor of Apache Stronghold. If there's no other questions, thank you all for coming out today. This is a very important fight. And, oh, another question.
Hi. Yes. And if you don't prevail in the Supreme Court, are you willing to take this to the International Court? Because there is the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity of Genocide, and this seems to me exactly what's taking place here. It is a form of genocide.
Yeah, the question is, what are the options beyond the Supreme Court? And again, we're very optimistic of if this came to the Supreme Court, but there are international human rights conventions. There's the Inter-American Court on Human Rights that has heard a number of cases. And that question is exactly right. What's going on here is not merely a violation of religious freedom and not merely a violation of indigenous rights, but it's a violation of fundamental human rights. There's something inside of each one of us that thirsts for the Creator, thirsts for the divine. And the government, what you heard from the United States government today, is that we don't care about that. It counts for nothing. And it's a deeply it won't prevail at the end of the day. Seeing no further questions, thank you all for being here. This is a hugely important fight. Thank you for supporting Oak Flat. Thank you for supporting Apache Stronghold. And thank you for supporting the religious freedom rights of everyone in the country today.
You did a good job. Yeah, very good.